Welcome to Come and See, your podcast for finding truth in a world of chaos. Brought to you by All for Jesus Living Waters Ministry. With host and founder Richard Case and co-host and retreat leader Kathy Ricconi. Join us every weekday at this time to discuss news, spend time in the Word, and receive answers to your personal questions about living life in God's truth. And now your host, Richard Case.
Well, good morning, Kathy. How are you guys doing this morning?
Good morning. Doing great. Doing great. I can't believe how fast the summer is going by right now.
Man, July and heading into August, and it goes fine. I'm already making plans for the fall retreats in New Hampshire, and
yeah. So you're coming out for Woodsy Stock as well, I heard.
Yeah, we're coming out for that, and that's going to be fun. And enjoy the Labor Day weekend out there. That'll be a great time.
It's always a great time. Yeah. And this time it's going to be a big fundraiser as well for Lydia's House of Hope as well as his mansion, which is exciting. We had Teresa Tozier on here before, and she's part of Lydia's House of Hope. And it's going to be amazing to just see what God does to bless all of that.
Yeah. And it's kind of fun. It's a little bit fun, for us, you and me and you and Dan, Linda and I, that part of the glue is abiding, and
Yes.
it's really, people are starting to really understand that, and it's having a multiplying effect. Actually, we're going to talk today a little bit about sowing and reaping, but that over time, the mansion, Lydia's house, other ministries, C12, it's because I think actually what we've talked about is where there's unity, God commands blessing.
Commands blessing, right.
And unity is, well, let's go seek God. And now, as people are processing that, like Teresa, for example, now she's connected with Dave and Melissa and you and Dan. And, we have a heart just to follow God.
Right.
And God says, well, how about if I take that sowing and actually make it even greater in a bigger way, because I have now a group of people that are all seeking me, and they're not seeking their own way, which, by the way, is what I think diminishes ministry, is because we don't have a kingdom mentality that, if we, seek God, He's going to bring about greater and greater things. And by the way, the joy of greater and greater things, like you and I have a joy about Lydia's house, for example, and Scott and Christian Cornell.
Yeah, and God's just doing great things there.
And we've contributed financially to it, and now we sowed into Teresa, and we get to hear the stories.
Right.
Man, look at that, and it's a rejoicing, not a competition.
Right.
Man, look at what God is up to, and we get to be part of it. And how can we support each other, including even this weekend up at Dunkel's is going to be, well, get your pocketbook out and help support these ministries,
Right, because God's moving and shaking here.
That's right. I'm going to speak, and I'm bringing handkerchiefs, so I'm going to sell them for $100 each, and then we can get money, for the ministry and guarantee healing, and maybe not. Maybe that won't work.
You don't think so?
I don't think so. The neat thing about our ministry is that people are very generous, and we've never from day one ever asked for money, and people willingly give it, particularly with as you do the retreat, we do the retreats,
right?
And we always do first class, everything spectacular, and people say, well, how do you pay for all that, and because we don't charge them,
right?
Well, if you have a heart to excited, you can donate and give it, play it forward, and people do, and God has no issue with money. He can provide it, and so
He can do it at the drop of a hat.
That's right. So as we look at this concept, and it kind of is describing it briefly. We talked last time about unity. Is in the Bible, in life, the life of the covenant, there's a concept of sowing and reaping. And let me just set it up real simple. When I was a kid, by the way, my relative out in had a 550-acre farm in Iowa. And they had cattle and they had pigs, and then they particularly raised corn and soybeans. And as a kid, you kind of look at stuff, and I'd go out there. I went out there because they had me learn this a little bit, but I went out there at the beginning, middle, and end of the summer. In the beginning, all the farmer did, my uncle, was just he had these equipment, and they went out and planted seeds in the ground. It's still bare ground.
Right.
And all it is seeds in the ground. That's it. And then he watered it, made sure it was watered, and he took care of the weeds. And then pretty soon it starts to grow. And it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And then when it came at the end of the summer, the corn now is 7-8 feet high, and they all got stalks on them. So that all of that ears of corn, which now become seeds, if you think about it, some of that is used to replant, and some of it is used for feed for the cattle and feed for humans. Well, the one thing I noticed about sowing and reaping, I kind of understood it then a little bit, but as I got into a biblical understanding of it, is it takes time. And that what you sow, you don't immediately see the result. Usually, in your view of it, you don't see any.
Right.
Then all of a sudden, there's some. There's some more. And then ultimately, you get to see the full result. And then what did I do? As I participated, I went and had to reap and go out there and get on this machinery and harvest. That's what reaping is. You harvest what you sowed, and it took a whole summer for that to occur. And in our culture, in our frame of mind, is we want instant results.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And if I do this, I want this. And God says, well, scripturally and biblically in life, it's a sowing and reaping process. He said, so the key, well, you got to sow. Well, so what? So what? Even in a funny way of saying it, well, what do you sow? And that's the key. Is if you're going to get corn, then you got to sow seeds of corn. And there's a benefit to what you're sowing. So if he was out there sowing weeds,
right, then he's going to get weeds.
Well, he's going to get weeds, and there'll be of no value to it. So sowing and reaping is a real key principle, because it's this: I trust it, and I'm just faithful to my piece of it at the moment, not worrying about it. Just like we were talking about there in New Hampshire, is 3 or 4 or 5 years ago, would we have liked to have seen something like we're going to see this next year? Sure. We would have loved to. If you and I and Dave and Dan and Melissa and said, hey, let's go plan to make that happen. God said, well, then it ain't going to happen. Because this is my work. All I'm asking you guys, faithfully sow. You've done it with retreats. Dave and Melissa's done it with retreats. Rich and Linda's done it with retreats. We've poured into people there in C12 in New England. Scott and Kristen just started pouring into Teresa. And pouring into those people.
And to those ladies,
and the leaders at Lydia's house. We've been involved with the mansion all this time. Sowing. And I believe now, because of what's going to happen this fall, we're going to see the breakthrough of some of the growth. It's going to. Do you see?
That's amazing. Yes.
It's not time to reap it yet, but we're going to start seeing the growth of it. And all because what? We all, without even worrying about it, and without saying,
faithful to sow.
I got to know, we just sowed. Knowing that the fruit's going to come, and so it's kind of cool. So let's look at it.
That's
a couple verses. Go to Genesis 26. Read verses 12 to 14. Genesis 26, 12 to 14.
Sure. says, Then Isaac sowed in the land and reaped in the same year 100-fold, and the Lord blessed him. The man began to prosper and continued prospering until he became very prosperous, for he had possessions of flocks and possessions of herds and a great number of servants. So the Philistines envied him.
Yeah. Okay, so by the way, he's in a foreign place.
Mm-hmm.
And what did he do?
He was sowing into the land.
I sowed into the land, and I took care of the animals and sowed into them. And he said, as he sowed, the result was what? And it's interesting. It says 100-fold.
Mm-hmm.
It's way beyond what he could imagine. But at the same time, it's not really beyond what is natural. So, like for example, and by the way, and he uses these words sowing and reaping properly, it wasn't like he went out and planted and the next day he got 100-fold.
Right.
He's talking about seasons. He's talking about a fairly long period of time. But think of an ear of corn. And one ear has all these little kernels on it.
Right.
And one kernel is a seed.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I plant that seed, that one seed, in the ground. And 4 months later, 5 months later, I get ears of corn, and they have probably that one little seed might have produced 300 or 400 other seeds just on that one stalk.
Right.
So it's not
that multiplication factor comes out.
It's not beyond us when we think 100-fold, like, wow, that's really big. Actually, it's normal. That he sowed and God gave him 100-fold increase. And then, by the way, enjoy it, tithe, give it away to others in my work, store it up, use it for your animals, and it'll thrive even more as you sow and reap. And then it says, by the way, and this is interesting, the Philistines, what was their response to that?
It says that the Philistines envied him.
Ah, okay, now, envied him. So therefore, what were they not doing?
They were not getting the same result.
Because they're not sowing and reaping.
Right.
Because they were like, why bother? And God says, well, you envy this because why? It's true. See, it's so. If you sow, you're going to reap. There's a benefit to that. Hey, you guys can do the same. Interesting enough, you guys, even you foreigners, if you observe this, if you went and did the same thing, you get the same result. They envied it because they didn't want to go to work. They didn't want to do the work. They didn't want to do the sowing. And God says there's a principle here. Sowing is going to wind up with reaping. It's going to be It's going to be happen. By the way, it'll be multiplication, way more than you can imagine because of the principle of it. Okay, go over to Psalm 97, 11 to 12.
Psalm 97, 11 to 12 says, Light is sown for the righteous, and gladness for the upright in heart. Rejoice in the Lord, you righteous, and give thanks at the remembrance of his holy name.
Okay. This is purposeful because, and we're going to learn this, about finances, but Isaac, it was physical. Seed, helping animals, and they were fruitful. Here, he's talking about something different.
Says light is sown for the righteous.
Light. Okay, now think about that. What is light?
A light illuminates. It dispels darkness. You're able to see clearly in light.
Yeah, and it basically, as we look at it, the truth of it is that who is the light? Well, Christ.
Christ, yeah.
Okay, who's within us?
Christ.
Okay, now if I'm sowing light, and light is being sown for me, then that means the life of God is being sown. And he associates light throughout Scripture with truth.
Right.
Is that, are you processing, giving away, planting the truth of the light that is within you based upon my direction to sow it, which means, by the way, you're then going to reap it, for your benefit. And the benefit, by the way, is righteousness. And the righteousness is holiness. And holiness is life with God. And life with God is blessedness. I'm going to give you the covenant. So that sowing is always, okay, given the situation, how would you want me to respond? How do you want me to process? And particularly when we're in adversarial situations or we're in conflict, think of the way that sows light. It is, stay calm, respectful, let me go to forgiveness, and let me sow kindness, let me sow opportunity. And this is what, we actually have a retreat that we just finished that I'm going to tape this coming fall called The Amazing Grace of God. And
yeah, I've heard wonderful things about this.
It really is. And actually, Lee Bogart shared in her guest spot that it really made a profound impact on her, because she's learned that, I don't really need to go to judgment. I can be the light, and as I'm the light,
on herself or others.
Yeah, and as I'm the light, I then have the opportunity to sow the light of God into a situation or into a person. Give you an example, particularly working with some adult children of parents who are having struggles with these adult children, and because the children are pretty self-centered, they're causing difficulty for the family, and they're being harsh and demanding, and if you don't do this, then I'm gonna cause you trouble, or I'm not gonna show up for a holiday, or whatever the thing is, and of course that raises a sense of anger, and it's not right. What you're saying isn't right.
Right.
And that's true. It's not. But I say, look, let's go to God and see what would he have you sow into that situation.
Oh, that's good.
Now, I'm not talking about solving the problem, and I'm not talking about caving. Because sowing light is sowing truth, and we know something about that. God says, I don't want you to agree with false. So if somebody is trying to make you do something that isn't right, you don't say, well, for the sake of sowing goodness, I'll accept that. He said, no, that's not what I'm talking about. He says, just sow truth with honor and respect, and diffuse the harshness out of it, and take a different tact with it, and see where it goes. And by the way, if they continue to demand that, and they need you to do it, well, you're not going to do it. You're not going to change what you know to be true to please somebody that's unhealthy.
Right.
But you can sow in a certain way, or a certain honor, or a certain respect. And he says when you think of it differently, and that's why the sowing and reaping is so critical to the covenant, is it can be spiritual things. It can be attitude things. It can be emotional things. It can be how I treat somebody. How do I lead them to something? How do I speak the truth in love without offending them?
Right.
And there's all kinds of beautiful ways to do that, because God says, I want you to sow light. Guess what? My word will not return what? Void.
Void, right.
It will accomplish its purpose, but I need you to deliver it in a way that actually has a chance of sowing into some soil that matters. Otherwise, it's too hard. You're too hard with it, and you can't get there. So this verse is really important because it's talking about a dynamic of how you're living. And are you sowing as a way of living the life of God, the light of God, the truth of God into everything that you're involved in? And if you do, he says, guess what? There'll be a reaping of that. And you'll be the beneficiary, mostly because you'll be at peace, you'll be at joy.
Right.
And you'll get to experience some really cool stuff because you're sowing and you're going to reap. By the way, remember, it takes time.
Right.
Don't, because you said something today, you expect it to change tomorrow, and you don't have to persuade him the whole time. Just keep sowing, sowing, sowing. Let me bring about the life. So it's really a very important verse, for us to understand it. Go ahead and go over to Psalm 107, verses 33 to 38.
107, 33 to 38 says, He turns rivers into a wilderness and the water springs into dry ground, a fruitful land into barrenness for the wickedness of those who dwell in it. He turns a wilderness into pools of water and dry land into water springs. There he makes the hungry dwell, that they may establish a city for a dwelling place, and sow fields and plant vineyards, that they may yield fruitful harvest. He also blesses them, and they greatly multiply, and he does not let their cattle decrease.
Yeah. Okay, so first of all, think about what he's describing is the situation before you got there. Mm-hmm. What's he talking about there?
Well, initially, things are good, rivers and water springs, and so a bit of plenty, basically, and refreshment that is then turned in. But then on the flip side goes the other direction.
Yeah, it turns into wilderness. It turns into dryness.
Mm-hmm.
He said, so what you've, it was good. It now is not so good. Mm-hmm. But what do? Well, sow, and you stay there, and don't decide just because it's barren, just because it's wilderness, just because it's not all that you think it should be, that you ignore it. He said, actually sow into it. And you stay there and stay there and stay there because, yes, I know it's going to take a while. Yes, your perspective is why bother? Mm-hmm. And God says, bother because this principle of reaping is going to be sow, and I need you to be here, and you keep sowing life into the situation, or you keep sowing truth into the situation, and it appears dry. Ultimately, it's not going to be. Interesting enough, why? Because of you.
Right. Now, so this, though, would be different than like when you think of pearls before throwing pearls before the pigs sort of thing, because that would be, God instructing you to stay and to continue to sow. There are times, however, that he says you are throwing pearls before the pigs and do not stay and sow there.
Yeah, let's put this together. So remember, if we go to Luke chapter 10, it talks about, as far as you're concerned, offer your peace. We talked about this before. If they receive it, stay there, and help them understand it. Say the kingdom of God is there and bring healing. If they do not receive you, go into its streets and say, I dust off the feet, and the kingdom of God was here, but I'm going to not spend any more time here. I'm not going to spend any more energy here. Okay, so he gives us a little bit of a clue. Is that you're going to sow where?
Where he's working.
Where he's at work, and there's some receptivity. He said a lot of cases they've already rejected, and we can go down here in verse 16. He says, he who hears you hears me. He who rejects you rejects me, and rejects me who rejects me rejects him who sent me. Is that I'm not asking you to sow in a place that has already decided to reject you at the moment. It's only when there's a possibility of reaping. And he says, now I want you to be careful here. He says, don't you evaluate it, because it may look like wilderness to you. But there is a receptivity.
Right.
And I do want you to stay there. Now, there's going to be times, and I'm glad you brought it up, because otherwise I would say, well, I guess I need to always stay and sow.
Right.
And God says, no.
And that's not always the case.
Not true. No. A lot of times, dust your feet off. I don't want you sowing here because it's not going to be of any benefit. Why? And interesting enough, we can go to Mark, and this is in chapter 4, I believe. He talks about the sower, parable of the sower. He said, do you not understand the parable? And he talked about it, about the mystery of the kingdom. He said, how then will you understand all the parables? And then he says, let me explain something to you so you get it. The sower sows the word. These are the ones by the wayside where the word is sown. When they hear, Satan comes and immediately takes it away, and the word that was sown in their hearts. They likewise are sown on stony ground, when who they hear the word and immediately receive it with gladness, but they take no root, and so endure only for a time. Afterward, when tribulation comes, they stumble. These are the ones sown among thorns, and they're the ones who hear the word. The cares of the world, riches, deceitful and riches, choke it out. Now, ultimately, there's the ones that are sown on good ground, those who hear the word, accept it, bear fruit, some 30-fold, 60-fold, 100. Okay, so he's saying that that part of the sowing is, for me, God speaking, to show you what the heart looks like. Is there any receptivity here at all? Or is it hard-hearted? That ain't going to work. Is it that they don't even consider it and Satan just steals it immediately? Or they're so wrapped up in the world that they're going to have all these weeds and thorns choke it out. You can't get there. He says, and this is important, if I'm asking you to sow, by definition, I'm going to ask you to what? Reap.
To reap? Yeah.
Well, reap happens when? Fertile soil. I know that. He says, I know that. So that if there's situations where I'm asking you to make an effort, but it's too hard, too difficult, too oppressive, I'm not going to have you do that. However, don't look at the outside. The wilderness, the dryness. This doesn't look like a very good place.
Right.
He said, no, what matters? The soil.
Yeah.
If I'm asking you because there's soil there, sow there. By the way, it's going to produce fruit because there's a heart to receive it, and I know that. And be faithful to where I'm asking you to do it. And by the way, there's going to be, and this is where we're sheepdogs, is go make an offer to sow. Sometimes it's not going to be accepted, and I'm going to say, that's fine, move on. That's okay.
Right.
And don't stay there, interesting enough, don't stay there and say, well, yeah, but I got to sow, I got to sow. And you said, well, you forgot something. You didn't ask me because I know something. Is there soil there or not?
Right.
If there's not, it's okay. Not your responsibility. They've rejected me. Let's go. By the way, why? Because there's so many places where the soil is ready.
Is good and
ready.
ready.
I need you to sow there and stay with it, stay with it, stay with it. Why? Because I've asked you to. And you see that, there is some receptivity here.
Right.
Now, it may not be as fast as you want. It doesn't happen overnight. It's going to take a while, but you'll see it. I mean, I think of the New England.
That's exactly what I was thinking. Just the things that have gone on in the last 10 years, even in New England.
Yeah, 10 years ago, we would have said, man, I don't know. It seems like a tough place to sow anything.
Well, and statistically, New England is a mission field.
Yeah,
for sure.
I don't see much happening, and I don't know, and God says, well, there's soil there.
Just keep sowing. Just keep sowing.
And locate the ones that have a heart to hear. And then all of a sudden, there's going to be other people that have a heart to hear, and they're going to start learning to abide. And all of a sudden, that sowing is going to start producing real fruit.
Right.
And I'm going to demonstrate that enough that you'll know that you're in the right spot, even though you don't see the result. And your first thought of this is, why bother?
Right.
Because my timeline is way different than yours.
Right. And I do believe we're seeing things just multiply right now. It's incredible.
Yeah, I think so. And what a privilege. And see, God says to us is, are you enjoying this? And you and I and Dave and, Melissa, and it's like, yes.
Yeah.
How exciting is this? Is there anything better than to see, even after all these years, to start seeing some momentum built up of people that are going to live the covenant, which is what we're teaching. You're going to be blessed, but guess what? You're going to be called to do what? Be a blessing.
Right.
And you will,
Absolutely.
and you do, and it's going to multiply, 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 and we just get to be a few that we just sowed some nice seed. How fun is that?
It's amazing, right?
Yeah. So I'm glad you brought that up, so there isn't a confusion about, well, that means I should stay and sow every place. No. Where I ask you to sow.
Yes.
But don't look at the surface of it. What I want to show you is the heart underneath it, or what's available underneath it. And if I ask you to, you just be faithful, and I'll give you enough encouragement to know that you're in the right spot. So I'm really glad you brought that up, because I think we could have easily portrayed something different.
Right.
And it's really not that. So thanks for bringing that up. Well, we'll talk more.
Absolutely.
We're going to talk more about sowing and reaping tomorrow and the next week, and it's an important principle to really understand it. It gives us, by the way,
a fun one, honestly.
well, it gives us encouragement, and by the way, it takes away the pressure of the result. Well, I'm just asking you to sow. Don't worry, the result is mine to produce, not yours. So that'll be fun to understand. So we'll pick it up again more.
Great. Okay. Thank you so much. Thanks for sharing, and thank you for joining us, everyone. If you enjoyed today, be sure to be a friend and tell a friend. Continue to pass this on.
Yep.
And go visit the website for afjministry.com. There are some new things up there, new courses that have come up there, new subscription plans.
Yep.
If you want to jump into some of these courses, a lot of resources worthy of checking out right now. So be sure to jump on there and see what's going on. And thanks for joining us.
Yep.
Have a phenomenal day.
Yep. We'll see you soon.
Thank you for joining us for today's episode of Come and See, your podcast for truth in a world of chaos. Brought to you by All for Jesus Living Waters Ministry. Send us your questions and comments, and tune in tomorrow for more answers to your personal questions about living life in God's truth. Remember, God's will is best and none better. His truth brings peace in this world of chaos.